that to be so here, and her engagement on matters of substance has always been thorough. I expect that to be so here. And so I join my colleagues in welcoming her to this honorable chamber to give voice to not just the members of the League of Young Socialists, but all young people who have an interest in national leadership. Welcome to Senator Trim. I rise this afternoon to introduce a resolution, Mr. President, that is before this honorable chamber as order number 10. It has generated quite a bit of conversation in the public domain. We have seen the commentary coming from the persons who use the junction that is under reference, which is the junction located at Windsor and Lower Grays, which intersects in Christchurch and St. George, but also is en route to St. Philip and downwards coming into St. Michael. And so you have activity, volume of traffic coming through that intersection, and in some instances, you are seeing difficulties. Now, Mr. President, when we travel, we see four-way junctions all the time. And there's a logic to a four-way junction. Whoever is first stops, whoever is second stops, whoever is next goes, and it works fairly seamlessly. We do that when we travel. But this particular intersection is not a simple four-way intersection. It is an intersection that has a byway on one side, a byway on another side, and it allows for persons who are turning left in one instance, as well as those who are going right, to then encounter the traffic which is oncoming. And it has presented some challenges, Mr. President. We have seen from our medical professionals on more than one occasion having to respond to issues of car accidents at the scene. We have seen at least one significant mass casualty also at that location. And very recently, Mr. President, I believe just a couple of days after, if not the day of, the resolution being introduced in the other place, you then saw a major and a significant incident at that location, Mr. President. So there is no question in the minds of the public of Barbados, and certainly the traveling commuters who intersect that junction, pun intended, that there is a problem. And so the question became in the public domain whether or not we should have a roundabout or we should have traffic lights. And as we do with all matters which are technical in nature, we entrusted the responsibility for the analysis with the Chief Technical Officer and their officers in the Ministry of Transport and Works. Mr. President, there are, and I say this often, there are any number of outstanding and very talented and extensively trained officers in the ministries that populate and do the work of the government. There are any number of officers, Mr. President, who have studied for years, locally and internationally, to be able to do what they do. Sometimes, on the outside, we think, well, why don't they just do this? Or why don't they just do that? But they always have studied the options that are available to them. They've always studied and simulated what those options are and how they would play out in reality. And then they make recommendations to their leadership. I remember, Mr. President, in another location in a parish speaks, some years ago, there was another intersection which had seen quite a number of incidents, including a fatality or so, and there were persons who called for the installation of traffic lights at that location. They insisted that the best option there was traffic lights, and the government obliged. However, it was very clear at the time that the technicians in the Ministry of Transport and Works did not recommend putting traffic lights at that location, and they preferred an alternate solution. And that is because they had assessed it, they had simulated it, they had studied it, and they had made recommendations as to what worked. Now, if we fast forward to a few years, everyone has seen what the Ministry of Transport and Works was recommending was not the ideal solution, genuinely was not the ideal solution, and they have been asking for those same traffic lights to be removed. Now, Mr. President, equally so, in this location, the resolution before us is calling for the compulsory acquisition of 7 parcels of land amounting to 20,254.4 square meters located at Windsor and Lower Grays for the purpose of putting in a roundabout. That is because, Mr. President, the roundabout is meant to mitigate against the challenges of this junction, the four-way junction with the lay-bys. The parcels of land were the property, or are the property, Mr. President, of Barbados Farms and Foursquare Estates Limited, and it is meant to have a roundabout at that location studied by the teams, the technical teams, the engineering teams. I am not an engineer, and so I am not in the business of waxing philosophical or technical on matters that are not within my skill set. So they have been modeled by the MTW officials, and they have monitored in collaboration with the various departments within MTW how many vehicular accidents have been experienced at that location. And they found a couple of things. These are some of the things that they found, Mr. President. Some vehicles were driving straight through the intersection from the minor roads, coming from the direction of Brighton in the north and from Lower Grays in the south, and then intersecting with and therefore colliding with traffic on the right-of-way. It was also found, Mr. President, that because it is a rural area, that there was vegetation all around, and that vegetation sometimes was creating visibility challenges, but it also was felt that it would not be a favorable solution for traffic lights because of the location of the area and the height of the vegetation on all sides, Mr. President. It was felt, Mr. President, also that the roundabout, if installed, would provide a level of safety at night and in the daytime for all users. And if you go a little further down that road, Mr. President, also at the junction by coming from Carmichael Road over to Fair Pilgrim, we remember that just above the estates, there was a new roundabout installed there. No issues, you can see traffic moving freely, and the expectation is that the identical thing is meant to be done just further up at the intersection. Mr. President, from as far back as 2022, you were seeing, I think that was one of the last major collisions where we have 25 persons who sustained significant injuries as a result of that intersection. And while you would typically say, all right, well, people are driving through the intersection, they're stopping, they're not coming to a halt or a complete halt, or they're coming to a rolling halt. Mr. President, 100 Frenchmen can't really be wrong, and if too many people are doing the wrong thing, and if the same thing is happening at the same intersection, then perhaps there needs to be an infrastructure solution. So these parcels of land, Mr. President, there are 7 parcels of land in particular, but from as far back as 2010, Mr. President, there were attempts to amalgamate this particular undertaking and to have a land acquisition for the purpose of treating to this matter. It fell apart in 2010. We did not have it implemented, and so now here we are, Mr. President, in 2025, identifying 7 parcels of land in the square meter size that I have just outlined, asking for this honorable chamber to agree to the acquisition for the purpose of the installation, the construction of a roundabout. I am not going to dwell too extensively in my opening comments on this particular matter, Mr. President, simply because the residents of St. Philip have been calling for it and have been asking for an intervention. The residents of St. George have been calling for an intervention and have been asking for something to be done at this location. The residents of Christchurch coming from Lower Grays have been asking for a solution in this location, and it is the government's intention to compulsorily acquire these lands from the 2 entities that I have identified, over 20,000 square meters, and to construct a roundabout to bring relief to the commuters who travel this area oftentimes daily, and to make sure that we can protect and in some instances save lives. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Worrell.
Mr. President, I rise to make a contribution in this debate, and I would say that no one would object to the need for the roundabouts in those 2 areas, because they are particularly dangerous areas to traverse, and I believe that a roundabout is needed, necessary, and would help in terms of the better flow of the traffic management. But to be honest, Mr. President, what most Barbadians have an issue with, we are dealing with a land acquisition here today for the purpose of the construction of the roundabout, and the quantum of land that is being requested to construct the roundabouts, that is what the Barbadians have the issue with. And I do not believe that the government has done a sufficiently good enough job in explaining to the people of Barbados, or even to the members of this chamber, explaining to the people of Barbados or the members of this chamber how this land that is being allocated, 5 acres, can then be reduced to 2 roundabouts. Now, what would have been helpful is if for every parcel of land which will be compulsory acquired, that we have the plot plan, which at one point in time came with these resolutions, so that you can actually visualize and identify the area of land which will be acquired. Because compulsory acquisition of land in Barbados is not something to be taken lightly by any government and any people. Government has an authority by the stroke of a pen, especially a government that has the majority, to say, I want to compulsory acquire land. But does the government actually need the land that they intend to acquire for the purpose of which they state in the legislation that they're acquiring the land for? No, we do not have any evidence here, and Mr. President, I allow the senator to speak in silence. I would prefer to be heard in silence.
Senators, please, allow Senator Warren to be heard. Please, allow Senator Warren to be heard. Senator Nichols, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Compulsory acquisition using this particular piece of legislation to acquire land is very serious business, because it cannot easily be challenged once it is approved by the Parliament. We had a situation where the government used this similar legislation to acquire land which was a business liquidation center to turn into a hotel, depriving a business of that property, and up to this day that matter is still within the law court, because the owner of the land is challenging the amount in which the government intended to pay for the land. When the government compulsory acquire land, it takes to some extent the control away from the owner of that land to determine whether or not they wanted to sell the land in the first place. I believe that a government that campaigned on a platform of transparency has a right to offer the people of Barbados the information which they are requesting and they're concerned about. We do not know how this 5 acres of land will be utilized. Many Barbadians are of the opinion that you do not require 5 acres of land to construct a roundabout or 2 roundabouts. So could the government give some explanation as to where are the parcels of land being acquired? That would have been served by providing the necessary plot plans to identify every single parcel which is being acquired, and then what is the intended purpose of the acquisition. Because in the legislation it says there to acquire a roundabout, to build a roundabout. But if you intend to use the land for other purposes, well then that's in the breach of what we are agreeing to today. And for that reason, we do not have sufficient information to approve this acquisition. I do not think that government should come to the people of Barbados with a piece of legislation with any amount listed in terms of the quantity of land being acquired, but with no justification as to how this quantity of land is required and how it will be utilized. Even in some cases, we can't even go and say, well, look, this is parcel A, this is parcel B, or whatever the case, because we do not have that information before us. So we cannot just simply approve things in the blind just because it suits the whim and the fancies of the Barbados Labour Party at this particular time of day to allow them to compulsory acquire 5 acres of land. We did the same thing was done with the liquidation center, and that is still a matter in the law court. We don't know if the owners of this land may have any issue with the compulsory acquisition or if they had any plans to do it. But the point is, a legislative tool that is available to the government should not be abused and utilized at their whim and fancy. And if they want to use such a legislative tool, what is the harm?
Senator Worrell, you will be trespassing on a breach of the standing orders by suggesting that a government would make the policy with whim and fancy. It's a government's policy decision. You may not agree with the policy, but whim and fancy suggests a certain recklessness of policy intent, but also a wise parliament would not allow a government to get through with whims and fancies. I would like you to rephrase that and move on.
Thank you, Mr. President, but you may have just helped in terms of strengthening my point, because a wise parliament could only debate on the information which it has at its disposal, and my point is that this parliament does not have all of the information at its disposal to make a wise decision.
That is a reflection on the parliament. I'm saying you cannot say that the government implements this with whims and fancies. It is not how public policy is made. You may not agree with the policy, but to suggest that parliamentarians are approving things on the whim and fancy is imputing improper motives and a certain recklessness to the approach to their work. Just rephrase what you are intending to suggest so that you can move on.
Thank you, Mr. President. With your guidance, Mr. President, I would say that in order for a parliament to make a decision on such legislation and the approval of such legislation, you should have at your disposal all of the information which is required for you to make that decision. And today we do not have all of that information. And the fact that the public is asking a question as to why is 5 acres required to construct roundabouts. I think that any government that campaigns on a platform of transparency should see it as part of their duty to provide to the people of Barbados that information in such a fashion that you cannot object to it or that you have any difficulty with it. So that is all that is being asked for the government to come, be transparent with the people of Barbados and clearly outline to them the areas, the parcel of land, how much is being paid for it, because none of that is mentioned here in this acquisition either, what is being paid for the land, and also how it will be utilized. And perhaps the resolution may need to be amended, because if it is more than roundabouts, you should say it is roundabouts and other services so that we would know that, so that you would know what are these other services that will be included. But just to say that it is roundabouts, we Barbadians have had roundabouts for years and we know what they are. And none of them in Barbados are acre. I don't think that any of the roundabouts, even the one in Warrens, could possibly measure an acre. So there's nothing wrong with the public and for the opposition asking a question, and I don't know why the government is so heavy-handed, Mr. President, and see that we don't have a duty in these chambers to challenge legislation. That is the purpose of Parliament, to scrutinize the legislation that comes. If the government have problem with the scrutiny, well, then you should come clean. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, it becomes my duty to respond to this presentation that we heard from Senator Worrell. But before I do that, let me join with the rest of my colleagues in welcoming Senator Trim to this chamber. I've known her for a little while. I've been served with her on boards before. I've seen her blossom as a young woman of substance, a champion in many, many causes. And it is with great delight that I celebrated her appointment to this august body. I want to welcome her officially as a colleague and look forward to working with her for many, many years to come. Sir, a compulsory acquisition of land to facilitate the development of a roundabout, which everyone would agree represents a significant improvement for the safety of people who traverse that corner of Barbados, should not devolve itself into a political controversy in which the government is accused of using heavy-handedness to acquire land as a result of some vaunted political style that is now used to label the government. Sir, I heard Senator Worrell, and the problem with this phrasing of how he phrases the debate is that we are using this land to build a roundabout. There are 2 roundabouts contemplated. But what about the road with the culverts, the sidewalks, and the other infrastructure that would have to be placed in and around the roundabouts to allow people in rural Barbados to have the same options of being able to select the lane in which they want to traverse so they could go around the roundabout with minimal ease and as less disruption to other persons using the road. I say that to say this, that the concept that this is for a roundabout means that we're only talking about the circumference of the actual roundabout and not the actual roads and lanes around the roundabout. And we've seen some other roundabouts developed within rural Barbados that take up large tracts of land that allows easy egress to and from the junctions that were not there before. So that to suggest that the land is too much and the government is high-handed and heavy-handed and that he needs a lot of information really reduces this debate to a level of simplicity that really ought to take place on another popular forum that is afforded 3 or 4 hours on mornings, but not in a serious place like this. The bill has, the resolution has 7 parcels of land. And this is not to build a roundabout as has been repeated by the Honorable Senator, but to facilitate the use of the land in the best way to make sure that people traversing the area are not put in peril, that visibility when entering or leaving the junction is not in danger. And sir, we cannot contemplate how the population of Barbados will be in terms of settlements, in terms of housing, in terms of other suburban development. And the question is, does the government have to come back 10, 15, 20 years from now to acquire more land to make the road larger? So what the government here is now doing, sir, is really progressively saying that we are acquiring enough land to facilitate the development of the road and making the place safe, but at the same time you give yourself enough space to be able to expand in the future. So you don't only acquire the land for a roundabout, as was suggested. And so I wish not to delay the chairman, but if I had more time, and perhaps for his benefit, sir, and crayons, I would have been able to explain it for him. But sir, this resolution does not require the level of controversy that has been suggested. And with those few words, sir, I beg to support the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Cummins, please line up.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Senator Nichols for reminding this honorable chamber that one does not just as yet, I know all of us grew up in the time of the Jetsons, but you still don't manage to teleport into the middle of a roundabout. You actually have to get access to said roundabout first. And so absolutely, I thank you for drainage and all those things that go along with actual construction of a circle. So thank you very much, Senator Nichols, for a lesson in what is not teleporting. So I think what we have heard, however, from the opposition is a stark reminder once more, and each and every time, of their inability to understand basic policy matters and their lack of readiness to lead, Mr. President. So no, Senator Nichols raised one issue that I would want to just perhaps give a little bit more clarity on. One of the things that the Ministry of Transport and Works, and it was very clear in my introduction, that the Ministry of Transport and Works has done quite a bit of study on what's happening in the area. What they have seen in the area, Mr. President, is that in the surrounding areas of St. George, St. Philip, and Christchurch, there are a number of developments, housing developments, that are expanding rather rapidly. The Ministry of Housing is able to see the housing expansion in areas downstream, in Constant, in Parish Land, in St. George, heading over into Lower Burney and into St. Philip as well. And it is their judgment, Mr. President, that as housing expansion continues and people continue to move from one place into the other, that there is a need to account for that at this major conduit. And so, Mr. President, this is, and I repeat, a resolution to acquire compulsorily a parcel of land, a series of parcels of land. I am certain, Mr. President, that the owners of Windsor Farm and Barbados Farms, if they had a concern, they would not have needed to go to George Street to raise those concerns, but they would have raised them in the course of negotiations with the Ministry of Housing and Lands. And equally so, Mr. President, I want to also lay to bed the allegation that the people of Barbados are asking questions about what land is required and asking for transparency in this location. Because, Mr. President, I am certain that the people of Barbados are watching on social media. I have seen the Chief Technical Officer, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Transport and Works, the PS and the team from Housing on social media, in GIS, advertisement, on site, on the location in Windsor, and walking people in a transparent manner through the technical issues that led to their decision for a roundabout in this location. They too, Mr. President, did not need to go to George Street to give transparency. They have done it publicly, Mr. President. And so I want to commend the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Transport and Works, and all the technical teams who have done their work. They have done so publicly. They have shared with the public of Barbados in a public and in an open and transparent way. This government has not been heavy-handed, Mr. President. It has been open, transparent with the public, and it has shared all of the details on what is intended in the location. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution, the acquisition of land under Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 228, several parcels at the Windsor Low Grace Junction, parishes of St. George and Christchurch, do not pass. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The thanks the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, this brings us to the end of our business for the day. And I want to thank all honorable senators for their time here. I especially want to thank our newest and youngest senator for contributing, even by her aura, to this debate today. And I want to take the opportunity, as I adjourn this sitting of the Senate sine die, I want to take the opportunity to wish all Barbadians a safe and a happy holiday weekend. We know that there's quite a lot of activity happening. I know we heard in a different conversation earlier today that nothing is happening for crop over, but I'm sure that I saw a social media post earlier today where they said, try getting a ticket for Mimosa. Everything is completely sold out. And I saw on Sunday there were 60 events between Sunday and this weekend. So clearly there's a lot happening. It's also, though, Barbadians, I hope that you have an enjoyable and a safe crop over weekend. This is not the weekend, Mr. President, for any foolishness. Let people enjoy themselves in peace. And so with these few words, Mr. President, and these best wishes, I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be adjourned to sign a day.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. And may I remind that among the weekend activities, Friday is Emancipation Day, and the usual celebrations at and around the Bussa roundabout and statue and Kilumba village will be on. So you can go online and see, well, I'm not sure what's the starting time. There's still this. Yes, the usual walk will be held, I understand, around 7:30, and a cultural performance and speeches and so on afterwards. And you can include emancipation in your celebration as well. The question is that the Honorable the Senate do now adjourn, sign it aye. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. This sitting is adjourned, sign it aye.